5 minutes ago, my son called me just to say, "I love you." That alone might sound sweet to most people, but not to me. Not coming from Jason. There was a strange softness in his voice, one I hadn't heard since he was a boy, and even then only when he was trying to cover up something broken. He asked me about the black overnight bag sitting at my feet in the car, said he just wanted to make sure it made it into the trunk. And then right before hanging up, he repeated those 3 words, slowly, almost too slowly. I love you, like punctuation, like warning. The air in my chest turned cold. The mountains blurred around us as the road narrowed toward the Vermont border. I turned to my husband. "Turn the car around," I said. He didn't ask why. Not at first. He just flicked the signal, pulled onto the shoulder, and slowed the car with the same precision he used when reversing into our driveway at home. That was when the silence hit. Robert glanced at me, eyebrows raised in alarm, his hands tightening on the wheel. "What is it, Elle?" he asked. I didn't answer right away. My fingers had curled tightly around the overnight bag resting beside my legs in the passenger seat. It was an ordinary black duffel, the kind anyone might pack for a weekend away. Nothing about it looked suspicious. But that was what made it worse. I stared down at it like it might move. "Jason just called," I said quietly, my voice hoarse. He asked me if I had the bag, if it made it into the car. Robert's gaze flicked from the road back to me. "That's what's got you spooked." "No." It's how he said it. And what he said right after, I felt my hands trembling. It wasn't just the words. It was the tone, the way my son's voice had softened into something almost childlike, the kind of sweetness he only ever faked when he wanted something or was hiding something. He told me he loved me. Robert gave me a surprised glance. Okay, and he's never said that to me. Not like that. Not out of nowhere. Not since he was a little boy with jelly on his chin. Not during a phone call in the middle of a highway trip. Not in that voice. I stared out the windshield, watching the trees blur past every nerve in my body, pulling tight. I know it sounds crazy, but I know my son. Something is wrong. I don't know what it is yet, but this bag, this whole trip, it doesn't feel right. Robert was silent for a moment. He'd always been the calm one, the practical one. But he knew better than to question my instincts, especially after 50 years of marriage. When I felt something in my bones, I usually wasn't wrong. Without a word, he flipped on the signal and pulled off at the next exit. We merged onto a small rural road. The sound of traffic fell away, replaced by birdsong and the distant hum of power lines. We drove another half-mile before he found a quiet turnout and pulled over. I took a deep breath, still holding the bag like it might explode. "I know this is going to sound paranoid," I whispered, "but I think we should open it." Robert gave me a long look. "Are you sure no?" "But that's the problem. I don't know what I'm carrying, and I'm not going to cross a border with it sitting unopened at my feet." He reached for the zipper. "No. Let me," I said. "I need to see it first." He nodded and stepped back, standing beside the open passenger door while I pulled the bag onto my lap. My heart was hammering in my chest as I tugged at the zipper. The sound of it unzipping felt unnaturally loud in the quiet. Inside were Logan's pajamas neatly folded, a small stuffed dinosaur, a Ziploc bag of Cheerios. Everything a grandmother might expect to see. But beneath that, tucked under the soft layer of childhood, was something else. My fingers touched plastic. Thick, tightly wrapped. Square bundles. I froze. Robert leaned in slightly. "Elle," I didn't speak. I just pulled out one of the packages enough to see it clearly. Drugs. A significant amount. Even at my age, even with no experience in this kind of thing, I knew what I was looking at. I dropped the package back into the bag and zipped it shut with shaking hands. I placed it gently on the floor of the car like it had suddenly grown fangs. Robert stared at me, his face pale. "They were going to use me," I said. "They wanted me to carry this across the Canadian border." He was quiet. Then his jaw clenched. "We're going home," he said simply. I nodded. I didn't even realize I was crying until I tasted the salt on my lips. Robert drove in silence, the mountains retreating behind us as we wound our way back toward Rochester. I kept my hands in my lap, the bag now shoved into the back seat like it was just another piece of luggage, though we both knew better. The farther we got from the border, the more the tightness in my chest began to ease, but the weight in my heart didn't lift. I stared out the window trees flying past like they had earlier, only now the colors looked duller. I wasn't just shaken, I was unraveling. I could still feel the texture of the plastic-wrapped packages under my fingers. Still hear Jason's voice in my ear. "I love you, Mom." It made my stomach twist. I wanted to understand how we got here, how my son, my flesh and blood, had become someone capable of putting me in a position like that. 5 years ago, none of this would have made sense. Jason had been working at Miller Supply, managing warehouse inventory. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. He had a house, a wife, and Logan had just turned 3. Then the company downsized, and he was one of the first to go. He told me over lunch at a diner, poking at scrambled eggs he didn't touch, trying to smile like it wasn't the end of the world. I told him it was just a setback, that we'd help him get through it. That's what parents do. It started small, man. A couple $100 here and there, groceries when EBT ran out, gas money for job interviews. Then it became a few missed rent payments. I stepped in. Their car needed repairs. I covered it. Vanessa started working part-time at a nail salon, but it didn't make much of a dent. Eventually, I was paying for most of their bills. Rent, utilities, phone, groceries, daycare. Some months it felt like I was supporting 2 households instead of 1. Robert said we should set a limit. I told him it was temporary, that Jason was trying, but months turned into years. Jason picked up work when he could, but it never lasted. He said employers didn't want to hire someone in their 40s with warehouse experience and no degree. I believed him. I wanted to believe him. I still saw that little boy who used to collect bugs in jars and cry when one of them died. What I didn't want to see was the way Vanessa looked at me, the polite smile that never reached her eyes, the way she left the room when I came over, the rolling of her eyes when she thought I wasn't looking. Sometimes she'd sigh when I offered to help like I was interfering. I ignored it. I told myself I was imagining things. Maybe she just had a lot on her plate. But I started noticing the way she referred to things. When I bought Logan a new coat, she said, "Well, I guess that's one less thing we have to worry about." Not thank you. Just a transaction. When I filled their fridge with groceries, she mentioned how easy some people had it. Easy. As if Robert and I hadn't worked every year of our lives to have what little we had in retirement. As if our small savings and Social Security weren't being siphoned off month after month to keep them afloat. Still, I kept giving. I kept showing up. Because Logan. Because hope. Because mothers convince themselves they're doing the right thing until it's too late. Then last year, Vanessa called me, her voice thick with concern. Logan, she said, was struggling at school, bullied, isolated. Teachers didn't care. Class sizes were too big. She cried on the phone, and for the first time in a long while, I felt something real from her. I felt needed. Jason got on the line and told me they'd found a private school across town. Smaller classes, individual attention, a better environment. It sounded ideal. Then came the number. $18,000 per year. My heart dropped. We could afford it barely, but it would mean giving up trips, cutting our own expenses, dipping into emergency savings. I asked for time to think. That's when everything changed. The calls slowed. Visits stopped. Logan was suddenly too busy to come by on weekends. Vanessa never answered when I texted. Jason became short and clipped on the phone. When I ran into them at the grocery store, Logan ran up to hug me, but Vanessa pulled him back without so much as a nod in my direction. I had said no once, and that was all it took for the curtain to fall. Robert called it what it was. Manipulation. I wasn't ready to believe that then. I kept wondering if I had made a mistake, if I had let them down. Now I knew better. They hadn't just cut me out to punish me. They'd done it to prepare for something, to give just enough distance so that when they pulled me back in, I'd be so grateful I wouldn't question anything. Like an invitation to a lake cabin in Quebec, like a friendly visit to drop off an overnight bag. Robert reached over and rested his hand on mine. It was the smallest gesture, but it steadied me. "We're going to figure this out," he said. I nodded, though my throat was too tight to speak. In the rearview mirror, the sun was beginning to set. I leaned back in my seat and closed my eyes, but sleep didn't come. All I could think about was Logan, his soft curls, his laugh, his tiny arms around my waist, and how close I had come to never seeing him again. When we got home that evening, I didn't unpack. I left the bag in the trunk, still zipped, still tainted. I couldn't bear to touch it again. Robert didn't ask questions. He poured us both a glass of water, and we sat in the living room without turning on the lights. The shadows were enough. The next morning, I woke up early, made coffee, and stared out the kitchen window. The silence in the house felt different now, heavier. Not the peaceful kind we had enjoyed in retirement, but the sort that pressed in from all sides. Over the following days, I waited for something from Jason. An explanation. An apology. Even a lie. But there was nothing. No calls, no texts. The silence wasn't accidental. It was deliberate. The kind of silence that punishes. At first I tried to excuse it. Maybe they were embarrassed. Maybe they were waiting to see if I would reach out first. But a week passed then too. No updates. No messages asking about the trip that never happened. And worst of all, no word about Logan. I tried calling once. Vanessa picked up. I could hear Logan in the background, but she said he was busy and hung up quickly. After that, I didn't try again. The ache of it hit hardest on weekends. Saturdays had been our time. Logan would come over with his little backpack, his favorite stuffed dinosaur peeking out the top. We'd make pancakes together, then walk to the park down the street. He loved the swings, the way they made him feel like he could fly. Now every Saturday felt hollow. Robert tried to distract me. He suggested we take a short trip, visit friends, go fishing like we used to. But my heart wasn't in it. I spent most days cleaning things that didn't need cleaning, rearranging drawers, folding dish towels, anything to keep my hands busy. 2 months went by like that. The cold shoulder had settled into something colder still. Absence. We didn't exist in their lives anymore, not unless they needed us. Then, one Tuesday afternoon in late March, my phone rang. It was Jason. I stared at the screen for a moment, unsure if I should even answer. When I picked up, his voice was surprisingly cheerful. "Hey, Mom, how are you and Dad?" "We're fine," I said slowly. He went on about how work had been crazy, how Logan was growing like a weed, how they'd been meaning to call, but things got hectic. It all sounded rehearsed, like a speech he had practiced. That's when he mentioned the cabin. "Vanessa's cousin has a place up by Lake Tremblant," he said. "Beautiful spot right on the water. They had a last-minute cancellation, and we thought, maybe it would be good to get away. Just us, as a family. Reconnect." I said nothing. "We thought it might be nice for Logan to spend time with you and Dad again. He's been asking about you." The words twisted something in my chest. "It'll be relaxing," he added. "Fishing games, no pressure. Just a quiet weekend. You wouldn't have to do anything but ride along. We'll bring most of the stuff in our car. Just one small bag we might ask you to carry, since Logan's stuff fills our trunk." The room tilted slightly. I said I'd think about it, that I'd check with Robert and call them back. I ended the call and just sat there for a while, phone still in my hand. Robert walked in and raised an eyebrow. "Jason wants us to go to a cabin in Quebec," I said. He frowned. "After 2 months of radio silence, they want to reconnect. Spend time together." Robert leaned against the counter. "And you believe that I didn't answer. I didn't know what I believed." The next day, Vanessa showed up at our door with the overnight bag. She was smiling like nothing had happened. Talking fast, cheerful. "Logan's been so excited. He keeps asking when he gets to see Grandma and Grandpa again." She handed me the bag like it weighed nothing. "It's just a few things," she said. "Pajamas, snacks, a book. Nothing fancy." Her eyes darted around the living room. She didn't ask to come in. She didn't even make real eye contact, just smiled, handed over the bag, and left with a wave. I stood there for a moment, the bag in my hands. I didn't want to take it into the house. It felt wrong. Robert came downstairs. He saw me standing in the foyer. "Are we really going?" I hesitated, then nodded. "We're going. But we're going with our eyes open." He looked at me for a long second. "Are you sure?" I pressed the bag tighter to my side. "Just be careful," I said. He didn't argue. He just took the bag from my hands and walked it out to the garage, setting it down gently in the back of the car. He didn't say another word. Neither did I. But that night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the clock tick, counting the hours until morning. Something inside me was shifting, and I didn't know yet what it meant. Under a gray morning sky, we pulled out of the driveway just after 7. Robert was behind the wheel, his hands steady on the steering wheel, eyes fixed ahead. I slid into the back seat with the bag beside me, its zipper still intact, its weight growing heavier by the mile. Jason had insisted we take it in our car to make space for Logan's bike and travel gear. He and Vanessa were in their SUV behind us, close enough that I could see their headlights in the side mirror. We passed through upstate New York, the roads quiet, lined with bare trees, just starting to bud. I kept glancing at the bag. It looked so innocent. Just a nylon duffel with a small tear at the corner, the kind you'd toss in a gym locker. But it sat there between me and the truth like a ticking clock. I noticed things I hadn't before. Jason hadn't hugged us when we left. Vanessa had stood stiffly by the passenger door, arms crossed, eyes down. Logan waved, but she never looked up. That wasn't a mother bringing her son to see his grandparents. That was someone carrying a secret and hoping no one noticed. Robert flicked on the turn signal and exited toward a gas station in Vermont. We needed to stretch, refuel, grab coffee. I watched Jason's car follow. As Robert got out and walked toward the pump, my phone buzzed in my lap. "Jason." "Hey, Mom, just checking in. Everything good?" "Yes," I said. "Fine. We just pulled off for gas." "Right, I saw that." "Oh, hey, quick thing. Vanessa's worried the zipper might have snagged on Logan's coat." "You didn't open the bag or anything, right?" My throat went dry. I looked at the bag beside me. "No," I said slowly. "It's still closed." "Okay, cool. No big deal. Just didn't want anything to spill out." "You know how Logan packs his toys?" He laughed too, light, too rehearsed. "Love you, Mom." I said nothing. He hung up first. I stared at the bag. My fingers moved on their own, reaching for the zipper pull. I hesitated, then slid it open a few inches. Inside were folded shirts, a pair of sweatpants, and the corner of a stuffed elephant. I dug deeper slowly, carefully, until my hand hit something firm, wrapped in layers of plastic. My stomach flipped. I pulled the fabric aside. There, under Logan's clothes, were several rectangular packages wrapped in clear, vacuum-sealed plastic. White powder, no markings, no labels, just precision. My heart slammed into my ribs. I dropped the fabric and jerked the zipper closed. My breath came in shallow bursts. I looked up and out the window. Jason's SUV was parked a few rows behind us. I could see him inside, his head turned toward our car, watching. Robert returned with 2 coffees, his eyes immediately locking onto my face. "What's wrong?" I couldn't speak. I pushed the coffee aside and grabbed his arm. "Robert, I need you to drive us home right now." He blinked, confused, then glanced at the bag. "Is it what we thought?" I nodded. I couldn't say the word. He looked at the road ahead, the gas station, then Jason's car in the distance. "Okay," he said. He put the car into gear, backed out slowly, then pulled onto the road heading south. We didn't talk for a long time. I kept the bag on the floor now, away from me. My skin still crawled from touching it. They used us, I said eventually. Jason and Vanessa. They used us to carry that across the border. Me. His own mother. Robert's hands were tight on the wheel. What if we hadn't stopped? What if we had gone through customs? My voice cracked. We would have been the ones arrested. On Canadian soil. In a foreign country. He nodded once, jaw clenched. We're going to figure this out, he said again. But this time his voice didn't carry reassurance. Only anger. Controlled, quiet, deadly. We drove in silence, the road behind us stretching like a long, unraveling thread. We crossed into New York around noon, the border now just a bad memory we never reached. I watched the miles count backward on the GPS as Robert drove his silence louder than any radio. My hands were clenched in my lap, knuckles white, my thoughts spiraling back through years I had tried to bury. It had been winter 2006. Jason was a sophomore at SUNY Binghamton, living in a dorm called Dickinson Hall. The call came just after midnight. The voice on the other end was curt and unfamiliar. Campus police? Jason had been detained for possession. Not alcohol. Something harder. Pills. Possibly worse. I remembered grabbing my coat without waking Robert, slipping out into the snow. My heart beat so hard in my ears I could barely hear the road. When I reached the station near campus, Jason sat behind a metal desk, slouched, eyes rimmed red. His lip was split. He looked more annoyed than sorry. I handled everything. I paid the bail. I called a local attorney a colleague had once mentioned. I met with the dean, quietly assured him it was a one-time mistake, a misunderstanding. I begged. I convinced them not to pursue academic penalties. I pulled every string a mother could pull. When we got back to the car, Jason wouldn't meet my eyes. He mumbled that he was sorry, that it would never happen again, that he was just trying to fit in. I believed him. Or maybe I wanted to believe him so badly that I swallowed my doubts and moved on. I never told Robert. I told myself it was to protect him, but now I could see the truth. I had been protecting Jason, and that protection had cost me something I didn't even understand at the time. Now here we were nearly 20 years later. Only this time he wasn't a confused college student. He was a man, a father, a husband, and he had tried to use me to commit a felony. There was no dorm room, no misunderstanding. Just a calculated plan and a carefully zipped duffel bag. Robert's voice broke the silence. You never told me. I looked over, startled. Back then, with Jason, I knew something was off. I asked you. You said it was just a scuffle. I lowered my eyes. I thought he made a mistake. I thought he deserved a second chance. Robert's grip tightened on the wheel. We did everything for him, Eleanor. Tuition, rent, that apartment after graduation, the job connection through my brother, all of it. I know, I said. And now this. We were quiet again. Outside the window, familiar exits started to appear. The diner we used to stop at after church. The strip mall where Logan picked out his first Halloween costume. All of it felt warped now, colored by betrayal. At the next red light, I said something I hadn't said aloud until that moment. I think they've done this before. Robert looked over. What makes you say that? The way he asked if the bag had been opened. The way Vanessa wouldn't look me in the eye. They were nervous, not because they were lying for the first time, but because they were close to getting caught. Robert didn't respond right away. And Logan, he said finally, Do you think he knew no? I shook my head. He's just a child. He doesn't know what they're doing. He thinks we're going on a trip. We pulled into our driveway just after 4. The sun was starting to sink, casting long shadows across the lawn. Robert parked the car but didn't move to get out. I reached for the bag in the back seat, my fingers trembling. We need to decide what to do, I said. Robert nodded. But not yet. Let's go inside. Let's breathe. We walked into the house, the door clicking shut behind us like punctuation at the end of a sentence I didn't want to finish. I set the bag in the hallway, not even daring to unzip it again. It sat there like a threat, waiting. In the kitchen, I made tea. My hands moved by habit, measuring leaves, heating water pouring slowly. Robert stood at the window staring out at the street. "We can't just let it go," I said. "I know," he said, "but calling the police? Turning in our own son?" He turned to me, eyes tired. "He's the one who turned us into accomplices. He made that choice." I looked down into my cup. The tea was too strong, bitter. I kept thinking about 2006, about the plea in Jason's voice, the look in his eyes, the weight of the secret I had carried alone all these years. And now that secret had grown teeth. We pulled into Jason's driveway just as the streetlights flickered on. The porch light was already glowing, casting long shadows across the front lawn. Robert cut the engine, but neither of us moved. The duffel bag sat between us like a loaded weapon. My phone vibrated in my pocket again. Jason. His name had been flashing on my screen for the past 2 hours, every few minutes, relentless. I hadn't answered a single one. Robert looked over at me. "You ready?" "No. But let's do it anyway." I opened the door and stepped out, the air sharp against my face. Jason opened the front door before we even reached the steps. He and Vanessa stood there side by side, framed by the soft glow of their entryway. He looked pale, anxious. She looked unreadable, like someone who had already written the ending of this story. I walked up the steps and placed the bag on the wooden boards in front of them. I didn't say a word, not yet. I just looked at my son. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. I know I said. Jason flinched as if the words struck him. Vanessa stepped forward. "Eleanor, we didn't mean for it to go this way." I raised a hand. "Stop." She did. Robert came to stand beside me. His arms were crossed. His expression was harder than I'd ever seen it. "What were you thinking?" I asked, my voice low but steady. "What exactly did you think would happen?" Jason ran a hand through his hair. His voice cracked. It was supposed to be simple. A favor. No one would have checked. "It's just across the border. Just across the border." I repeated the words like they were foreign. Vanessa looked at the ground. Awesome. "We didn't have a choice. The debts. The people we owe. You had a choice," I said. "You just didn't want to deal with the consequences yourselves. So you handed the risk to us. To me." Jason shook his head. "You don't understand. They're dangerous. If we don't pay, you put your mother at risk of a federal conviction." Robert interrupted. "You knew what was in that bag. You let her carry it." Vanessa's lip trembled. We didn't know what else to do. I stared at them. I had looked into the face of my grandchild that morning, packed a bag full of snacks and toys. I had told him we'd see him soon. I had kissed his forehead with love that ran deeper than blood. "You chose to use me," I said quietly. "After everything. After the years of support, the bills, the tuition, the groceries, the car repairs. You decided I was expendable." Jason's voice broke. "We were desperate. So you threw me to the wolves. I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't know what else to do. You always come through. You always fix things." "Not this time," I said. He blinked, stunned. "I'm done. No more money, no more help, no more fixing." Vanessa's voice rose brittle and sharp. "If you cut us off, we'll lose the house. We'll lose everything. Then you'll have to figure it out," I said. Jason stepped forward. "Please, just this one last time. We'll turn it around, I promise. Just don't leave us like this. You left yourselves here," I said. "You made this choice, and now you live with it." I turned to go, but then paused. I looked back, not at Jason, but at Vanessa. "I remember when you married into this family," I said. "I hoped you'd find something good here. Love. Security. But you twisted it. You used it." She didn't respond. Her eyes were glassy but dry. Robert picked up the bag from the porch. "I don't want this near our home," he said. We'll figure out what to do with it. But not tonight. Jason looked at me like he was seeing someone he didn't recognize. You're really cutting us off. I met his gaze. No, you already did that. We walked back to the car in silence, the crunch of gravel beneath our feet the only sound. When we pulled away, I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I didn't need to. The past had been sitting there for years, waiting. Now it could stay exactly where it belonged. Behind us. We got home just after midnight. Robert didn't say much as he carried the duffel bag to the basement and locked it inside the old gun safe. I stood in the kitchen staring at the calendar on the fridge. All those little scribbles appointments, birthdays reminders. Logan's name circled in red on next Saturday. It looked like someone else's life. The next morning, over strong coffee and silence, I pulled out the folder with our bank records. I went online and canceled every card tied to Jason, the emergency fund we'd set up when Logan was born, the co-signed line of credit we had nearly forgotten about, the automatic transfers I had been sending monthly. They were all gone in under 20 minutes. Robert sat down beside me with a legal pad and a pen. We started adding it all up. By the end of the hour, the number sat at the bottom of the page, circled twice. $78,412. That didn't include groceries, gas babysitting, or Christmas gifts. I stared at the number like it had teeth. How did we not notice? I whispered. Because you kept hoping it would turn around, Robert said. And because you're a good mother. I shook my head. Not good enough to stop this from happening. He reached for my hand, but I was already pulling my coat on. I need to see someone. Jacob Winters had been our lawyer for over 15 years. Divorce settlements, property taxes, wills. He was reliable, steady, not prone to panic. He listened quietly as I laid everything out on his office couch. From the bag to the phone call, from Jason's past to the cabin trip, he took notes without interrupting. When I finished, he set the pen down. You realize what they asked you to do, don't you? I nodded. It was drug trafficking. Even if I didn't know exactly what was in the bag, it would have been my responsibility. He nodded once. I suggest you file a report, not necessarily to prosecute, but to protect yourself. If anything goes sideways in the future, there needs to be a paper trail that says you came forward, voluntarily. I swallowed. Would that hurt Logan? It might save him, Eleanor. He handed me a brochure from his desk, Guardianship Laws in New York. He tapped one paragraph near the bottom. If there's concern about child safety or neglect due to criminal involvement, you can petition for emergency custody. I felt my heart squeeze. They'd never let me take him. Jacob leaned forward. If it gets worse and you're the only stable guardian left, the court might think differently. I left his office carrying a folder of forms and a knot in my chest. When I got home, Robert was in the garage checking the car tires. Everything okay? He asked. For now, I said, that afternoon I got a call. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail, then checked the message. It was Grace, Vanessa's sister. Hi, Eleanor, it's Grace. Sorry to call out of the blue. I've got Logan with me this weekend. Jason and Vanessa said they had work, but I overheard them talking. Something about heading up to Quebec again? I thought you should know. I hit replay. Then again, Grace's voice trembled slightly. She didn't sound surprised, just tired. I called her back immediately. Grace, thank you for telling me. Do you know when they left this morning around 8? They said they'd be back by Monday. But Eleanor, this isn't the first time they've gone without telling anyone. Do you know if they took anything? Just a backpack. Vanessa was carrying it, and Logan's with you the whole weekend. Yes, he's fine. We're baking cookies. He misses you. Tell him I love him, I said. And please, if anything changes, call me right away. I hung up and sat down at the kitchen table. My fingers moved on their own, opening the camera roll and snapping photos of the old text messages from Jason, the voicemail from Grace, the log of canceled transfers. I printed out screenshots and tucked them into a folder marked just in case. I didn't call the police, Not yet, but I saved everything, and I waited. The call came just after sunrise. I was still in my robe, standing at the window with a cup of coffee when the phone buzzed on the counter. I didn't recognize the number, but something in my chest tightened. I picked it up. Mrs. Matthews. This is Special Agent Laura Kim with the Department of Homeland Security. My hand gripped the phone tighter. Yes, this is she. There was a pause, then a professional but steady voice continued. Your son, Jason, and his wife, Vanessa, were detained early this morning at the Highgate Springs border crossing into Canada. They were found with controlled substances in their luggage. My knees buckled. I pulled out a chair and sat down slowly. Are they all right? They're in custody, she said. No one was injured. Your name is listed as an emergency contact. Their minor child is currently in protective care. Protective care. Those two words cut through me more than anything else. Logan, where is he? I asked. I want to see him. I need to see him. The agent explained that Logan had been transported to a local child welfare facility in Colchester, Vermont. I wrote everything down, names, addresses, contact numbers. Then I asked one question that had been burning under my skin. Did they say anything about the bag? Another pause. Then they claimed no knowledge of its contents. Said someone else packed it. Of course they did. I thanked her, got off the phone and stared at my trembling hands. Robert walked into the kitchen already dressed. One look at my face and he stopped. It happened, I whispered. They got caught. His face didn't change. Just a slow nod. Then, what about Logan, I told him. We'll bring him home, he said. That's it. Nothing else. We left within the hour, filing paperwork at the local courthouse first thing. Jacob, my lawyer, met us there and walked us through the process of emergency guardianship. It helped that I had everything ready. Screenshots, text messages, notes, photos, proof. I handed over the folder like I'd been rehearsing it in my sleep. By noon, we were pulling into the facility in Colchester. The building was sterile and gray, flanked by 2 tall pines and a tired-looking chain-link fence. I hated it instantly. The caseworker was kind but tired. She explained that Logan had been quiet, no outbursts, but hadn't eaten much. When she brought him out, he was holding a small blue suitcase and his stuffed bear, the one I'd sewn a patch onto last Christmas. His eyes were puffy, his hair tangled. But when he saw me, he ran. No hesitation. Just ran. I dropped to my knees and caught him in my arms. Nana, he whispered against my neck. Nana. I held him so tightly I thought my arms might snap. But I didn't let go. Robert knelt beside us, rubbing Logan's back. He didn't say a word either. We signed what needed to be signed. Promised check-ins, evaluations, visits from the agency. I didn't care. I would have signed my soul over if it meant getting Logan out of that place. The drive home was quiet. Logan clutched his bear and stared out the window. Every now and then he'd glance at me like making sure I was still there. Still real. Back at the house, I helped him carry his suitcase upstairs. He didn't ask where his parents were, not at first. He unpacked slowly, placing the bear on the bed, lining up his socks in the drawer like he'd done it 100 times. It was only after dinner, when we were sitting in the den watching a cartoon with the volume turned low, that he asked, "Are they coming back?" I turned to him, brushing his curls back from his face. They made some bad choices, sweetheart. They're in trouble right now. But you're safe here. You're home. He nodded, small and solemn. His eyes were too old for his age, too knowing. He leaned against me and I wrapped my arm around his shoulders. He didn't speak again, and neither did I. That night, after he fell asleep in the guest room with his bear tucked under his chin, I stood in the doorway and watched him breathe. The rise and fall of his chest, the twitch of his foot under the covers, the small sighs he made in his dreams. For the first time in weeks, my heart felt full and broken at the same time. I walked back downstairs, sat in the kitchen, and opened my laptop. I pulled up the files from the guardianship case, updated them with today's documents. I created a new folder called Logan, Emergency Custody. Then I clicked open a blank document and titled it Statement of Events. It was time to write everything down, from the beginning. The first time I walked Logan through the gates of Westlake Elementary, his hand clutched mine like a lifeline. I could feel the small tremor in his fingers, the way he leaned closer when we passed the playground. It was the same school I had worked at for 23 years, but that morning everything felt unfamiliar. His new teacher, Miss Chloe Bennett, greeted him warmly, crouching down to his level and smiling gently. Logan gave a small nod, not letting go of my hand, until I gave him the go-ahead. I watched him disappear into the classroom, my heart heavier than I expected. The first few weeks were quiet. Logan didn't speak much at school. He avoided recess. He flinched at sudden noises. Miss Bennett sent regular updates, kind but concerned. One day she called after school hours, her voice hesitant. Logan drew something in art class today, she said. It was violent. A house with bars on the windows, a suitcase with red scribbles. There was a figure with a sad face, and two taller ones with angry mouths. My stomach dropped. I thanked her, promised I'd speak to him, and hung up before my voice could shake. That night, I waited until after dinner after Robert had finished the dishes, and Logan had changed into pajamas. I knocked on his door and sat beside him on the bed. "Did you draw something at school today?" I asked softly. He nodded, but didn't meet my eyes. "Can you tell me what it was?" His voice was quiet. Mom said the trip would be the best vacation ever, but then it wasn't. And now, I don't want to go anywhere anymore. I felt the tears rise but blinked them away. Sin. I wrapped my arms around him, pulling him close. "You don't have to go anywhere," I whispered. "You're home now. You're safe." The next morning, I called Dr. Lila Hartwell, a child psychologist who had worked with many of our students during my time at Westlake. She agreed to see Logan that week. When we arrived at her office, Logan hesitated at the door, then reached for my hand again. He went in without protest. I waited in the lobby, clutching my purse so tightly my fingers ached. Dr. Hartwell came out 45 minutes later with a small smile. "He's guarded but bright," she said. "There's trauma, but he's resilient. He needs consistency, safety routine. And love, of course. A lot of love. We can give him that," I said without hesitation. Over the next few weeks, Robert and I built a new rhythm. Mornings began with breakfast at the table, toast and scrambled eggs. We walked Logan to school together. In the afternoons, Robert taught him to play chess, his patient voice echoing across the living room. Evenings were for reading. Logan curled against me with a book in his lap, his head resting on my shoulder. Sometimes he asked questions about the stories. Sometimes he didn't speak at all. I let him set the pace. I started keeping a journal, recording each step forward. Logan smiled today at breakfast. Logan asked for seconds. Logan laughed when Robert tripped over the dog's toy. I kept all the legal paperwork updated, filed new reports with Jacob Winters, scanned and saved every document in multiple places. I created timelines, gathered witness statements, and labeled photo evidence. Everything went into a folder marked Custody Defense. We had no idea if Jason and Vanessa would fight the guardianship. But if they did, I was going to be ready. One afternoon, as I picked Logan up from school, Miss Bennett stopped me with a bright smile. "He talked today," she said. "My son told us about his grandpa and a game of chess. Even raised his hand during story time. I felt warmth spread through my chest, the kind I hadn't felt in months." At home, Logan came running into the kitchen. "Grandma, look," he said, holding up a crude but cheerful drawing. It was a house with a tree and a dog and 3 stick figures holding hands. I bent down beside him. "Tell me about this," I said. "That's you and Grandpa and me," he pointed. "And that's our house. And that's Finn chasing a squirrel." I laughed. "Finn doesn't chase squirrels." "He does now." Logan grinned. Later that night, when he was asleep and the house was quiet, I returned to the computer. I opened my journal and began typing the entry for the day. Logan laughed today, loud and free. Outside the window, the wind stirred the leaves. Somewhere deep inside me, something began to settle. A piece of peace, hard-earned but real. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. A plain envelope, no return address, just my name typed neatly across the front. I opened it slowly at the kitchen table while Logan was in school. Inside was a folded page and the unmistakable handwriting of my son. He said he was sorry, that he didn't know what else to say, that he thought about Logan every day, that prison had stripped away everything except the truth. He wrote that he wanted to fix things to prove he could be a father again. I read the words 3 times, then folded the page and set it in a drawer. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just sat there for a long while, letting the silence speak. A week later, a formal notice came from the county court. Vanessa had filed a request for visitation rights. Her handwriting was neat and almost cheerful. She claimed she was in a rehabilitation program and wanted to reconnect with her son. There was no mention of what she had done, no ownership of the fear she planted in a child's heart. I handed the letter to Jacob Winters at our next legal meeting. He read it, sighed, and said he would file an objection and request an extension on the emergency guardianship. We stood before the judge in early spring. I wore a navy blue dress and carried every document I had kept. Robert sat beside me, his hand resting gently on mine. Jacob outlined the timeline from the arrest to the stability Logan now had. I spoke softly but firmly about Logan's progress, about the trust we had rebuilt, the safety of our home. The court extended guardianship indefinitely pending any significant change in the parents' circumstances. Until their release, Logan would remain with me. I nodded as the gavel fell. Relief didn't rush in. It settled quietly like dust in the light. That evening, Logan poured his own glass of milk for the first time. He carried it carefully to the living room where Robert and I sat reading. He crawled up beside me, his voice a whisper. "Yes, Grandma, I don't want to go back." I looked at him, his eyes clear and tired and young. "You're not going anywhere," I said. "It's quiet here," he murmured. "Yes," I smiled. "It is." Later that night, I sat by my desk again. The journal sat open, pages worn from weeks of entries. I picked up my recorder, the one Jacob had advised I keep for documentation. But this time I didn't use it for legal notes. I pressed record. I used to think forgiveness was the most important thing, that letting go meant healing. But I've learned something else now. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is draw the line. To say, I will not let you hurt me again. That I deserve better. That the people I protect deserve better. I paused. Outside, the wind brushed softly against the glass. "This is my story," I said. "If you've lived something like it, you don't have to stay silent. You're not alone." I turned off the recorder, leaned back, and closed my eyes. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes after the storm has passed and nothing waits to fall apart again. It was not a perfect ending, but it was mine, and it was enough. If you've ever had to choose between love and self-preservation, between family and doing what's right, I hope you'll share your voice too. Stories like these matter. Leave a comment, stay connected, and remember, you're not alone.